In note 6.4, example 8e, we're going to graph a general cosine function of the form y equals 2 cosine the quantity pi x plus pi over 4 minus 1. And the first thing that we're going to do is rewrite this, factoring out the value for b. So when we do that, b is pi, so we're going to factor out pi, and we'll get pi times the quantity x plus 1/4 minus 1. And now we'll do the rest of our analysis. So the first thing we want to find is the axis of oscillation, or you could call that the midline. Here we can see that our graph is shifted down 1 unit, which means the d-value is -1. So the midline is going to be at y equals -1. And I'm going to put a scale on the y-axis. I'll do 1 square is 1 unit. And then I'm going to draw in the midline with the dashed line, because it's not really part of our graph, at y equals -1. It's just a guideline for us when we sketch the graph. The next thing we want to find is the amplitude. The amplitude comes from the value of a. A in this function is 2. So I am going to use the amplitude to draw in the maximum and minimum line. So I'm going to go up 2 units from -1. So we'll have a line at y equals 1. That's going to be where our maximum is. And y equals -1, that was our midline. And I'm going to go down 2 units. So from -1 down 2 units will put us at -3. So we're at y equals -3. That's where our minimum values will go. Next thing we want to figure out is the period. The period is 2 pi over b. B for this function is, this is a different case. We haven't had one like this. B is actually pi. So we're going to have 2 pi divided by pi, which is 2. So the period is not a multiple of pi. And we want to know the intervals for key points. Actually, just the interval singular. The interval for key points are going to be every quarter period. So 1/4 times the period. So that'll be 1/4 times 2, which is 1/2. So key points will be every 1/2 unit. Next thing we want to know is the starting point. And remember, since these functions have, we know where the key points will be, we can just find one starting point and transform that. So for a cosine graph, the key point that's easiest to transform is 0, 1. And then we'll see what happens to x and y due to these transformations. So what's happening to x values? X values are, when we have this pi here as our b value of pi, that means they're going to be multiplied by 1 over pi. And the other thing that's happening to x values is we have plus pi over 4. So if we have plus pi over 4, that means this is going left pi over 4. I'm sorry, left 1/4. And so that means we're going to subtract 1/4. So we can apply these transformations. So the x value starts at 0. 0 times 1 over pi is still 0. And then we subtract 1/4 from 0. We get -1/4, 1. Now we're going to look at what's happening to y values. So y values, because of the amplitude of 2, well, they're going to be, we have a vertical stretch by a factor of 2. So y values are multiplied by 2. And we also have a shift down 1 unit. So y values, we're going to subtract 1. So this is because it's down 1. And this one up here was left 1/4. That was a transformation. So now let's see what happens to the point. So y used to be at 1. We multiply by 2. We get 2. And then we subtract 1 from 2. So our starting point is -1/4, 1. And now we're going to set up the scale on our x-axis. So we're going to be counting by 1/2. So I'm going to do 2 lines as 1/2. So this is 1/2, 1, 3/2. 2, 5/2, 3, and I'll put some values in the negative direction. And now we're ready to sketch our graph. So our starting point, remember, was -1/4, 1. So let's put that on here, -1/4, 1. And then every half of unit, so that's going to be every 2 squares, I'm going to get a new key point. So I'm going to be at 1/4, -1, and then 3/4, -3, and then 1 1/4 back to the midline. And then we can continue on with this pattern, moving 2 units horizontally and then to the next key point, either midline, minimum, or maximum. So I'll continue putting points on. And then we can go ahead and connect these with a nice smooth curve. Make sure your corners or the turns are rounded and put arrows at the ends of the graph.